Today we begin week 2 of our 40 Days of Prayer series, and we're using this 40-day period to seek God's direction for our lives and our church's life. How's your prayer time been going this week? Good? Have you been using the prayer prompts that have been coming out every morning? And are you praying an additional 15 minutes at least each day? Come on, be honest. Almost every day. All right. Today is the 8th day of our 40. And we're going to dig a little deeper into our 40-day experience today. As I shared last week, a 40-day time period is used many times in the Bible. God uses periods of 40 days to prepare his people for the future. He used 40 days with Noah, 40 days with Elijah, 40 days with Jesus. And he used 40 days with the apostles, as we saw last week. And he used a 40-day experience with Moses. In fact, he used several 40-day experiences in Moses' life. But today we're going to look at one of those 40-day experiences. And we're really just getting started in our own 40-day experience. So it might be good to see how we can get this 40-day experience off on the right foot. How can we make sure that we're not just going through the motions of this? What are some things that we need to do to make sure our 40 days of prayer are experienced with God? That's what we hope to learn as we look at one of the 40 days experiences of Moses with God. Listen again to our reading from Exodus 34, verses 1 through 9. The Lord said to Moses, "Cut 2 tablets of stone like the former ones, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the former tablets, which you broke. Be ready in the morning and come up in the morning to Mount Sinai to present yourself there to me on the top of the mountain. No one shall come up with you, and do not let anyone be seen throughout all the mountain. And do not let flocks or herds graze in front of that mountain." So Moses cut 2 tablets of stone like the former ones, and he rose early in the morning, went up on Mount Sinai as the Lord had commanded him, and took in his hand the 2 tablets of stone. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name, the Lord. The Lord passed before him and pronounced, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, yet by no means clearing the guilty, by visiting the iniquity of the parents upon the children and the children's children, to the 3rd and 4th generation. And Moses quickly bowed his head toward the earth and worshipped. He said, "If now I have found favor in your sight, O Lord, I pray, let the Lord go with us. Although this is a stiff-necked people, pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your inheritance." Now Moses had been through quite a bit by this time. His life was really wild. He was born to Israelites, raised by the Egyptian king's daughter, killed a man, and was on the run for 40 years. God called him to free the Israelites, and he confronted the king and led the Israelites out of Egypt. He had been with God and had received the law from him. He'd seen the Israelites make a golden calf and begged God not to kill them. He'd asked God to let him see him earlier, and now he's on the mountain again with God. And the passage that we're focusing on today is at the beginning of this 40-day experience of Moses. We see how the 40 days started, day 1. Let's see what we can learn from Moses, his experience, that might help us get started right on ours as well. Number 1 is Moses saw God. Before anything could happen, Moses had to experience the real presence of God. He had to understand who he was dealing with. He had to see that he was dealing with someone much greater than he could ever imagine. He had to come to the point where the one controlling his destiny was the one controlling everything else. Now, we need to get into our own 40 days experience by first understanding who we are coming to. We are coming to the one who can do greater things than we can even imagine. We're coming to the one who holds the future in his hands. He is the God of everything, and he is awesome, and he is mysterious and massive. He is uncontrollable and dangerous. He answers to no one, but everyone answers to him. This is our God, and that is who we are coming to in these 40 days. Next, we notice that Moses worshiped. There was nothing more Moses could do at that time but worship. He threw himself onto the ground, and that was an instinctual reaction. He was with God, and he hit the ground. His heart was probably ready to leap out of his chest. The one who created the ground he laid on was talking to him. The one who gave him life was there, concerned for him and for his people. When we understand who we're coming to, worship should be also, for us, instinctual. We are coming before the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. That fact alone should overwhelm us. And if we're not overwhelmed by our God, then we maybe have a serious flaw in our view of God. Worship is not so much taught as caught. You get caught up in the majesty of who he is, and you can't help but worship. You worship him with song and with words and with your life, and you pour out all your emotions to the one who is the Lord. Next, we notice that Moses repented. Being in the presence of God made Moses more aware of who he and his people were. Being in the light of God exposed Moses' and the Israelites' iniquity. Moses repented for his own sins, and he also repented for the sins of his people. You know, the light of God exposes us, doesn't it? If we don't know him, it causes us to run and hide. But for those of us who do know him, we stand and admit that we've missed the mark. We see him as he is, and we see everything else that we've been chasing, and there is no comparison. We turn from our emptiness and our hopelessness and turn to the one who will be our Lord God forever. Then Moses prayed. He prayed. Moses was talking with God. He was in the presence of God, and so he talked with God. And Moses listened to God, too. Now, we too get to talk with God. We understand who we're talking to. We're worshiping him because he is the greatest being ever. Being in the light of the greatest being ever exposes who we are. And we turn from our darkness, and our prayers are usually, unfortunately, mostly us talking to God. But it appears that God spoke more to Moses than Moses did to God. So we learn to listen. We listen for God to speak in our hearts. We examine the scriptures and we listen for God's voice speaking to us. We feel for that movement of God's Spirit, and we trust that he will lead us as we completely rely on him. Finally, Moses asked to be God's possession. Have you ever asked God to be his possession? Moses wanted nothing more than for God to possess him and the people of Israel. His greatest desire was that God would claim him and use him. And so he gave himself to God. And this is where we want to be as we move into the rest of our 40 days of prayer. We want to desire God more than anything. We want to know his way and will above all things. And so we give our future to God. We don't know what our future will be. And so we give it to God and trust him. We move to the point where our greatest desire is to desire what the Lord desires, to place our lives entirely in God's hands. And so we give up all of our dreams and exchange them for His dreams. And what could be better than to pursue what Jesus pursues? In a moment, we're going to form up into prayer circles here in the sanctuary. Those of you watching online, you can just pray there, if anyone's there with you, to pray with them. We're going to spend a few minutes praying with each other, and we're going to focus on what God is saying to us today as individuals and as a congregation. I invite you to offer to God what is on your hearts and minds, and to ask God to reveal His heart and mind to you. The screens will scroll through today's prayer prompt so that you can include the prompt in your prayer circles. So I want you to find 3 to 5 other people. Circle your chairs if you can. I know they're linked together, and that's not always easy, but turn to neighbors. But 3 to 5 people, and let's just spend a few minutes in prayer. Use the prayer prompts that'll be on the screen, and let God direct you as well as you pray. Let us be in prayer together. Go ahead and group up in groups of 3 to 5.